Well, hello, world out there. Welcome to EventIcons, another exciting day. Oh, with some sound effects, which is always fun. Gotta like that. All right. So here we are. We are on episode 1 billion of EventIcons with some really great guests today. So we're talking about learning and performance design. We know the key reason people attend events is education, but how we assimilate knowledge is different today than it was even a decade ago, certainly different across cultures. Designing those meaningful educational settings and formats can truly set your organization apart. Improve retention, we're going to talk about that, and application of knowledge. And ultimately, it delivers on the personal and professional needs of our participants and our organizations. So we are going to go ahead. We are on EventIcons. I'm Tahira, and we have our fantastic guests today, Drury and Avinash.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons.
Presented by Endless Events.
The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons.
We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show.
Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook.
Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com.
Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
We're going to start off. Let's talk about you guys first. We're going to just remind our guests that they can join us on our chat roll and they can ask questions, and we'll pick those up and send them over to you guys as they ask them. So, Avinash, here we go.
Good luck.
Chandarana.
Let's start with it.
Hello.
Hello.
You are the Group Learning and Development Director of MCI, and you are driving MCI's comprehensive talent development strategy, ensuring that MCI employees reach their full professional and personal potential through the innovative ongoing education and trainings provided by the MCI Institute, your in-house learning provider. So welcome. And I'm going to probably call you Avo for the rest of the show. Is that good?
That is good. Avo is my nickname, so yes, you can do that.
Excellent. I might call you Avinash sometimes. We'll see how we go.
That's
Drew,
okay.
yeah. And Drew Cutler, Creative Director at Drury Design Group. He's worked with Apple and Amazon and IBM and Samsung and so many more. And he thrives in the niche where technology, creativity, and interpersonal skills meet. And I have spent some time with both, certainly some time with Avo, and I've spent some time with Drury, and I'm really excited that you guys are both here today. I also like that it's like Drew at Drury kind of just all fits together with letters, so that's pretty fun.
Yeah, that just sort of happened. It wasn't intentional, you know.
Right? Sometimes
Landed at the right workplace.
The serendipitous happening. So now obviously we're gonna start with some questions, but I also know both of you have a ton to say, so I'm gonna just give you guys lots of time to talk. But let's start with what got you into this meetings and events industry? And if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? Let's maybe start with Drew.
Well, my background as far as learning is concerned, like right after college, I worked for Apple Computers for a while, and I eventually moved up to a place where I was not just training folks how to use their own technology, but I was training our trainers all around New York City. And that sort of got my foot in the door with Amazon. I worked there for a few years, and that was my first chance to actually design a curriculum and actually see it work. After doing that for a few years, I met the folks at Drury, and I came in here and started to look at creatively, like how I could take my background in the creative world and my background in learning and start to merge those a little bit together. One of the things that I found is really cool and fascinating about creativity and learning is that they're kind of rooted in empathy, meaning that it's important for a learning designer to think about how this is going to affect the classroom, how it's going to resonate, right? How that message is going to be perceived, you know, whether it's e-learning or it's a keynote speech. And similarly, as a creative director, you have to do that same kind of thing. How's the music going to feel? How's the food going to resonate? What are the colors going to look like? Oftentimes, you have to do this before you're actually on site. You know what I mean? So that's kind of been my journey over the last 3 years, working with Chris and Jill Drury and the awesome team here in New York City, just to find a way where those things actually meet and there's some synergy. And we found that, and which I'll talk about today, that there are places.
Excellent. What would you be doing if you didn't do this?
I don't know exactly, but it might involve grilled cheese sandwiches and a food truck.
That was so what I wanted to do. I wanted to be open from like 10 till 2 and just do like you could choose your own bread and choose your own cheese. Be so fun. All right, so Avinash.
I want Drew's story.
You have a good story. We're ready for you.
No, that's not true. No, I mean, how I got in the event industry, it's just by chance, really. It was never planned, and I think like a lot of things in life. But I was in the 90s, I was in a youth leadership program, which was involved with performing arts and community service, and was fortunate enough to travel to all different parts of the world. And as a result of that, in the late 90s, I actually, through some connections through that particular organization, a person called Robin Lockerman, some of you out there may know him. He's one of the executives at MCI. He started his own association management company. And when I was in Brussels, and the company was based in Brussels, I actually called Robin up and said, "Hey, Robin, look, I've, ready to start, into a new career, and would love to start working with you." And eventually, I did start working with him, and that carried on actually. And that organization then became part of the MCI group, and I've been involved now for 20 years now within MCI, in association management and events and so on. But in the capacity of someone working specifically in learning and development for the organization.
And if you weren't doing this, would you also want to have a grilled cheese truck?
I would love that, actually. I would love to do something that I'm completely opposite of who I am. I think something like an artist or, a YouTuber or something else. I don't know, something like that.
Well, if you launch a YouTube career, I'm totally going to support you.
Really?
So, all right. The topic of the day, learning and performance design. Big topic. So can you guys each just tell us what this term means to you when you start to talk about learning and performance design? How are you talking about that? Let's go with Avo first.
Well, first of all, it's not a question of talking about it. It's a question of, what do you do when it comes to impacting performance? So I think learning and performance design, I think performance is for me the outcome. And learning design itself is actually a process whereby you really are taking elements of analyzing a situation. In other words, for example, for an organization, but you can also apply this to an event, is what are we trying to, the analysis piece is, okay, what are we trying to solve here? Or what is the problem? Or what are the objectives we're trying to reach? Mm-hmm. And then ultimately from that point, working with that, you would then ultimately design and develop a solution, right? Where that solution will include content, it will include formats. You implement that, and ultimately you evaluate the success of that through, meeting those objectives or not. So there's that whole process of learning design in order to basically, in the way I would see it, is to influence performance, to improve performance. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly and love the process of working backwards from some high level objectives. The one piece that I would want to add to that, specifically, not only with the learning hat on, but with the sort of creative and strategic hat on, is working really closely. Chris Drury is amazing at this too, by saying, how can we take some of these high level objectives and weave them through all the parts of the event, right? Not just the learning, but how can we bubble them up to other sessions? How can we pull them through the hallways? And how can we make sure in the main tent, in the general sessions, those messages are resonating too, So that's a big piece of what we talk about a lot here. And you're absolutely right. And I love that idea, starting from those at the beginning. We have to get some key people in the room. I love it when strategy folks, creative folks, learning folks, as well as some of the leadership team are all together at the same time early on saying, what do we want to happen? And how can we make sure that trickles down into each part of this, so everyone gets kind of the most bang for your buck.
Right. No, it's good. And I think oftentimes, the big mistake is, you start working with tactics very quickly, right? Because people are so confident in the event industry. It's very much, I'm not saying it should be like that, but it happens to be very operational and logistics driven. And so you start very much in the comfort zone, which is tactics, right? Oh, we need an event for this number of people and it needs to be this location. But why are you doing it in the first place? How does it fit into a bigger strategy? because it is a part of something much bigger, right? Whether it's a sales strategy or a human resource strategy or, brand building or whatever it may be for the organization or for the client. You need to start there first. How does it fit within that bigger picture? And that's that analysis phase, right? And then who's going to be there and ultimately understand that demographic. And then what do we need to do, right, in order to try and achieve the level of performance we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think our clients are doing this?
Clients?
I guess there's two questions there. So are our clients already doing, some of that initial thinking around who's attending and why they're attending? Or is this something that we really, as event professionals, need to really be driving and asking those questions?
I think it's the latter. I mean, whether or not clients are doing it, maybe some are, some aren't. But sometimes I think the biggest challenge is they're not always, when it comes to the event piece, they're not connecting, or probably not connecting enough. How does that event drive the strategy, the bigger picture strategy? Because once again, an event is a part of a journey, right, that they have within the organization. But maybe there's a disconnect between how does that event influence what we're trying to achieve as a strategy. So I think as event planners, it is absolutely the duty and the responsibility of an event planner to be having the skill, right, to actually take the conversation to a higher level. And that's when you start to talk to different people higher up in the chain in the organization. When you really start talking about performance, you start talking about, okay, what is your strategy? What are you trying to achieve here for the business? And how does this event help you achieve that, right? And I think having those types of conversations will also allow you to have different types of decision makers around the table. Otherwise, you're always dealing with someone who's, for example, just dealing with event logistics on the side of the client sometimes, which is not necessarily where you want to be.
Yeah, Tahir, I think that it is part of our job. I think it should be a service that you offer. I think strategy is only one piece of what you do. And it is easy to get lost in the logistics of who, what, when, where, when we should start with the why, up front. Okay, why are we even spending the money to bring these folks together? What do we want to accomplish? And those are hard conversations to have, because a lot of folks are heads down. They're real busy. Like, people have a lot of work. They have a lot of stuff to do. And it is our job to be that sort of outside force that says, hey, why don't we pick our heads up from the day-to-day work, and let's not only look at what we're doing now, but what do we want to do next year? What are we doing 5 years from now? What specifically do you guys want? How do you want people to think, feel? What do you want them to do after they leave this event? And I think it is a part of what we do.
And I think that's a key piece, Drew, right? When you think about exactly that, and that's part of adult learning, actually, which we may talk about later, is when you think about what do you want them to think, feel, and do. Even understand, that's where it begins with, right? When you think about the event itself and then you think about the delegates, one of the key things for me, and that's no different, for example, from a training workshop, right? If you think about traditional training, is what do we want them to think, feel, and do after they walk out of the room? You can apply exactly the same thing in a conference or an event setting, for example. But the challenge here, I think, is that we are talking about different skill sets here, knowledge base of event planners in terms of what skills they have versus the skills that are required to have these types of conversations. Because we are talking about being far more consultative here as an approach. And that is a skill in its own right. And that is sometimes maybe a comfort zone, which is a little bit stretched, I think, for a lot of event planners. I'm not saying all of them, but I think for many, it's not something they've ever done before, right? So I think that's a part of the challenge as well.
I think you're right. I mean, when we sort of go into this idea of, I'm an event planner, what does that mean? Most of us, I went to school for it. Some people went to school for it. Most people didn't, which is 100%, most people fall into it. You start doing it, you keep doing it. And you don't often have the as you said, it's a different, I think it's two things. I think it's an ability to understand a little bit more about the neuroscience of learning and performance design and how we tie those together. But then also having an interest in that and going down that path as the three of us have done in different ways. And then how do we apply creativity to those learning environments? But it's, how do we get people to understand that the why is more important than the how? And focus on that think, what are those think, feel, do outcomes? What are some of the ways that that can be sort of enabled in organizations?
I think one thing that we do specifically, as talking about making it a service, is that we've kind of branded it. You know, we do these things all the time where we have what we call an idea jam, which is really just a fun way of doing more than a brainstorm. It's a little one part design thinking, you know, one part ideation, but it has a look, it has a feel, it has a brand, has something we can talk about. And we've said to clients before, like, if you're thinking of bringing your people together and you need to think about who they are and what they're like and what challenges they have and how you might solve those challenges, why don't we host an idea jam? You know, we'll come to your place, we'll put some stickies on the board, and we'll really start to hash these things out. And I even mentioned Think, Feel, Do because I've used that. You know, I love the idea of creative meetings being fun. I think the best ideas come from a place of fun. And if we all just sit at a table at 8 a.m. and stare at each other, we're probably not going to make a very inspiring meeting, you know? So the idea of you know, having a snack, doing it over a couple of hours where people close their laptops, you really get to engage folks and listen and think. And just writing on the board, think, feel, do. All right, everybody take one sticky note and write one thing that you'd like to put under each of these, you know?
Yeah.
And ultimately,
like
these are just catalysts to get the conversation going. You know, it's not like you're going to solve every one of your problems in that one little meeting, but we have these sort of containers that we use, and these sort of formats to get people talking.
Yeah, and I think that's great, Drew. And I think that's exactly what it is. It's to have that conversation and have that dialogue, ask open-ended questions, and refrain at that stage to give solutions.
Right.
Right? Always validate what they're saying, challenge what they're saying, but not necessarily giving solutions because it's too soon. It's the first phase, I think, of opening up, you know, their minds to be thinking about, well, why are we doing this, right? And what are we trying to achieve here at the end, right? So looking at the outcomes, right? So yeah, again, starting with the end in mind. But I think this interesting something to I want to throw in some geeky stuff here a little bit, if that's okay.
Please do.
Yeah.
Because that think, feel, do is not by chance. It's actually from adult learning theory. If you look at Kolb's work, Kolb spelled K-O-L-B, you look at the learning cycle, you'll see it's a part of it. You know, the whole concept of a learning cycle is that people go through an experience. That's where it begins with, right? So let's just use an example. An experience is an event itself, and you're listening to speakers, or you're part of a workshop or whatever in an event. The next phase is about that sort of observation, that reflection of what has happened. And then saying, right, what does that mean to me as a delegate, as an individual? Okay, and you sort of have this abstract conceptualization, and then basically say, right, but now what am I going to do with that? And this is all about the think, feel, do cycle of learning, and that is adult learning theory. And typically, where we see the failure is that the delegates go through an experience, but all of the rest of the pieces are just not there in order to make it impactful. Right? In order to influence behavior, in order to influence, like, okay, so what was the most important part for you from this particular conference or this session? Putting it into context, and ultimately, you know, what am I going to do with that when I go back to work? And that is fundamentally where there's a breakdown if you think about real influence of return on investment. And this is exactly where I think people in the learning profession, people like, I'm not just saying Drew and myself, but people who have worked with learning in real case of adult learning, you know, should be partnering even more so with the events industry, because I think there's a gap there.
And I think that what you just said is really important, because I think that one of the challenges that we have as event professionals is there's a lot to do already, and we're not necessarily also learning professionals.
Correct.
And to say, hey, how about if we bring in this other skill set? You know, whether that's, you know, working with an organization like either of yours, or whether it's, you know, that it's okay to partner with other people who bring a skill set that is actually going to deliver you an outcome that is, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, meetings being, you know, worthwhile, and meetings, you know, being transformational, and that as sort of being an ideal state. And the reality is that, you know, as a participant, we're choosing to attend meetings. I always say that we basically sell it to our boss based on the education we see being offered, but we return because of either connections we made or a feeling that we had or an aha moment of what we return with. And that it's okay you don't necessarily have to be the person who's good at learning and performance design. Doesn't have to be the same person that's also good at making sure that the layout works, and that all of the supplier partners are brought together to create the right, audiovisual and creative. There has to be a bridge, but
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
need more than one person in order to create a
Well,
successful transformational outcome.
right. Learning and development is a profession. So, and I think sometimes of course, I happen to be someone in learning and development, working in the event industry for many, many years. And it's true, we're trying to squeeze way too many, I believe, way too many skill sets with a meeting planner. Say, you need to be a meeting designer, you need to be this, you need to be a consultant, you need to be a learning professional. It's not effective. It's like saying to a doctor, why don't you become a dentist tomorrow? Right? So a little bit like that. And I think we have to be careful here because, everyone has their specialization. There is a concept of generalization, right? And to be generalists. But I think we need to know where the fine lines are, right? And instead of trying to do everything ourselves, how can we partner with other experts? And I think we have to be better at doing that.
What do you think, Drew?
One thing that Chris Drury always says, right, who's the chief creative officer here, is that we're not just, he wouldn't really describe us as an events company. We are a communications agency, and we think of it as, what do you want to say and how's the best way we can do that? We've done stuff where people came to us thinking we were going to make an event, and we ended up getting all of it out in a series of email blasts or e-learnings or there were so many ways to strategically communicate with folks. Another thing that Avo said that really, and that you said as well, that kind of resonated with me and reminded me of something of one of my colleagues, Pete Rosso, says that the meeting itself is just one blip on a much longer communication timeline. So if you aren't saying something before that or after that or along the year, you've missed some real opportunities. And that's a place where I think the learning folks can really help us work back from some of those objectives and trickle out content, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. But short answer is yes, I agree with both of you folks.
So one of the things I'd like to just jump a little bit to is this idea of, so we're creating content for people. So as we start to create content for our meeting attendees, one of the things we're certainly seeing is that we now have attendees who are coming from more diverse cultural backgrounds than ever before in the history of time. Certainly it doesn't matter what country we go to anymore. People are moving and there's mosaics and there's, how are we starting to deal with that? So I know that, Avo, I think probably your Twitter handle is Global Nomad, if I'm remembering correctly. So how has that changed your perspective on learning?
Yeah, I mean, this always reminds me of, when does a fish know it lives in water? as a thought, and of course the answer is when it's out of it, and that's why you get this term of a fish out of water. It's like being a fish out of water when it's sort of like thrown into a new environment, and basically that becomes a situation of do or die. How do I adapt to this situation? So when you are actually, like I've been very fortunate, but also deliberately in my past, is that I've always wanted to explore different cultures and to live in different places. And I've been very fortunate to live in several different countries and continents growing up. And it's a passion of mine. And the reason why is also because it makes me curious and I like to discover new things. I like to learn about new things and how to adapt. And I think that's what learning is. It's all about adaptation. It's all about recognizing that, we cannot remain complacent. We can't stay on our own little box because there's so much more out there. So I think when you think about learning, what I can, and then link it to the ingredients of learning, because your question was, being a global nomad or someone who's dealing with cultures, how does it influence from the learning point of view? Well, yeah, it drives curiosity. And I think, to be a learner, you've got to always be curious. You've got to be always asking questions. You've got to be seeking answers. You've got to be open to try new things and experiment. And I think that's what keeps people fresh. It keeps them relevant, especially in today's fast-paced changing world, right? I mean, it's becoming harder and harder to remain relevant, especially with the whole influx of digital. And then now we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, so I think these key ingredients of actually, from my point of view, having lived and traveled like many of us, right? Many of us online who have done that, it just opens up our minds more. It helps us to learn maybe easier.
And I think, before the show, Drew, you described yourself as, a boy from Brooklyn with a dog. But certainly as you're developing curriculum for even just, I'm going to take out the word just, as you were looking at developing curriculum to work with an Apple and an Apple Store audience, for sure you had a whole ton of different kinds of people coming in to learn. So what were some of the things that you thought about while you were developing some of that?
Well, I mean, we live in New York City, so I mean, there's people here from all over the world, and I think that I was fortunate in that time to be training people, and I know Abbo's teaching some folks in person tomorrow. I think I was fortunate to be in the classroom in front of people, because most of the information you get from your classes through physical body language, not just what they say or what they type, you know what I mean? So if I had someone that didn't speak English so well, or if I had someone that maybe from a different cultural background or had a different perspective on something, you could start to gauge their interest. You could start to gauge their eyes and their movement, and sort of see if you're leading them in a way that they don't understand or you need some help with, in sort of that kind of way. I think it's a really important skill beyond just this kind of idea of a global training, to stay in the classroom. I like to get myself in the classroom from time to time, and not just constantly designing programs that I might not actually deliver. I love that, because it reminds you that that's really where a deep connection is made, is when you're talking to someone one-on-one.
That's really interesting. So do you think that we spend enough time paying attention to the cues of our audiences in real time?
No.
No, I don't think we do either. I'm just like, that's a good point, Drew.
No. And I think that's because that's again, it's a skill in its own right. Is that when you created for example, let's once again put it in the context of an event, right? And we're talking about session speakers, okay, rather than the training workshop, because we're talking about in the scope of and meetings. So if we think about session speakers, how attuned are they in terms of who's in front of them? Mm-hmm. Or is it that they're just thinking about everything they've created in a PowerPoint and getting through them? Right? Because that's what they've created. Right. But so what, right? Because in the end, how much do they know? How much influence are they having in real time? Those words that you used to hear. Is it actually resonating with their audience? Are they on track? Are they confused faces, for example? Especially when you talk about multicultural environment, right? Right. Because then you're talking about your language, the complexity of the words you use, the slang that you're using. You've got to always remain tuned into your audience. And that's no difference in a training workshop than it would be, for example, if you're dealing with a session or a breakout session at a conference.
So I would, from what I'm kind of hearing is like, we always think of PowerPoint as being a tool. Every time I think of PowerPoint, I just remember the 1998 Dr. Larry Corey coming into the room, and we had slide projectors back of house, and he had projectors. I remember them. And it was so like, what? But nothing has changed in PowerPoint since 1998. Right? PowerPoint, I have a bug to bear here. PowerPoint is not the problem. It's the person who's using it that's the problem, because you can do amazing things with PowerPoint. Because, it's not PowerPoint, it's Prezi now, it's this, whatever. It doesn't matter. If you know how to use the tool effectively, you can do amazing things. It's like a simple example is, stop using, that whole rule of 6 bullet points and 6 words per line or something. Now it's all about just having one picture, right? I mean, that's already a big change, right? So it is about really how you use these support tools, these aids. They are an aid. So I blame it on PowerPoint, just to be clear. Yes. So what are some of the other stumbling blocks we see? So we've got, so we're not really connecting with our audiences. We're maybe too reliant on presentations we've already created without thinking about how we can adapt them in real time to people. What are some of the other things that just make you just shake your head?
I want to hear Abba's sort of take on this, but one thing that I think resonates with the learning community in general is not just sometimes the folks that actually have to sort of sign on the dotted line to approve this training are not the people that are in the learning, right? So they have not developed it necessarily. So it's not even as much cost in dollars as it is cost in hours. It's time. It's very difficult to convince the higher ups that you do need a full day with your people to roll out new tools, roll out new software, do some kind of other HR training. It's hard sometimes to convince folks that you can't cram all of this into an hour-long workshop. It's not realistic. So that's something where I think that we have to continue to look for ways creatively to kind of sell it, and not even externally, but internally, to the folks that are actually putting it together. What do you think, Avo?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about here is, how do people develop and what channels are we using to do that, right? In terms of developing the knowledge, skills, and attributes that we're looking to have them sort of absorb. And so there are multiple ways, right? And it's true that, but Drew, I think the challenge here is coming back to the word time. In today's world, more than ever before, it's even harder to try and get time. Now, if you think about the average learner, through Berson's research, right? Berson by Deloitte. The average learner spends 1% of their work week learning. That's about 24 minutes. If you equate that out to a year, it's 2 to 3 days. Do you think that's enough in terms of how much time they're spending to develop their skill sets? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. So what we do need to do from a learning point of view, and this can also apply in the event sphere, is how do we engage? What formats are we using? So we need to look more in micro learning, which is something as a trend, which is now really taking hold. Certainly in our organization, we're using a micro learning platform. Artificial intelligence, how do we personalize and customize content? So these are ways of augmenting the learning experience. But I do absolutely agree, Drew, that that's just a surface level, right? But it's still a form of developing your knowledge and ultimately building your skills. But you will absolutely need to still have those half-day workshops, one-day workshops where you need to have that face-to-face physical interaction, because it's a very different type of learning. But it's not easy to get that time, as you say, Drew, because people see learning and development, sadly, as a cost, not an investment. Right. That is an attitude which is very difficult to break.
Yep. I was recently read an article about LinkedIn, who acquired lynda.com, and they had this thing called something along the lines of Learning Fridays. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name of it, but basically there was like a heads down, no Outlook meetings. There was an hour a week, every week, in which basically it was personal development. Go online, take a class, do something for yourself, whether it was getting better at Microsoft Excel, managerial practices, soft skills, interpersonal skills, whatever it is. This is an hour dedicated to you. And I wish we saw more organizations doing that, because I think it actually does have a really big impact on people's just feel for their job.
Yeah, and I think I agree, but then we also need to, there's another part to that to make it effective. So on the one side, giving them time, okay, that's one thing. Does it mean they're going to do something with it from a learning point of view? Not necessarily, unless they have an inherent intrinsic motivation to continue to learn, right? Mm-hmm. That's important, that intrinsic motivation. If you give it to them and they couldn't care less, they're probably not going to do it. The other element, which I think is critical, and once again, bringing it back to the event sphere, is when people go through a learning experience, whichever shape or form it takes, the effectiveness also is influenced by the follow-up and the follow-through. So ultimately, for example, if a delegate were to go to a conference, they've gone through a lot of learning, of course, through all the sessions, a lot of money has been spent on it. But typically what happens afterwards is that they go back to their day-to-day, and they've got all these deadlines to meet and thousands of emails in their inbox. And ultimately, what happens with what they actually absorb during that event? Right. It's pretty much gone. And the other, and coming back to my point, that's missing piece is, where's the follow-up? Is their direct manager, for example, having a conversation with them saying, hey, you know what? You went to that conference, or we even signed off for you to go on that conference. We spent a lot of money. What happened? What did you take out from it? And you know what? If you do that as a direct manager, for example, to your staff members or your teams, saying, what happened? What did you get out of it? How is this going to help you? What are you going to do and by when? That type of follow-up will really have a huge influence on impact. And that I think is something we can also wrap into the whole concept of a life cycle of how a delegate goes through the journey of a pre, during, and certainly that's the post piece of an event.
And it's definitely one of the missing pieces, 100%. We just let them go off and then, okay, well, that was, great. but you're right, now what? So, we talk about sort of the learning journey and how we do that. And of course, who's responsible for that learning journey quite often is our speakers. So let's talk about speakers just for fun. So how about those speakers? What are you guys seeing that's working, that's not working? How are people selecting them? How should we be selecting them? Let's just open it up.
Well, one thing that I see is that there's sort of different tiers, right? Depends on who you're working with. And what we find is that folks at the sort of CEO, CTO level, they often have speaker coaches and a design team. They have some people helping them. But there is a large number of people in the middle of the organization who frankly need help, want help, and we're missing an opportunity to help them. And I love what Ava was saying earlier. I think this ties in perfectly, where you have someone, a lot of times we're talking at this level very technically. These might be dense slides, they might be dense content, and we aren't helping them get the most out of their story. And frankly, the most out of that time that they have, whether it be building in better looking slides, helping them clarify the story, helping them simplify the message, helping them, like he said, understand who's in the room, what do they want to hear, and how can we cater the message to them. All of these are things that we've really tried to look at, and analyze and help folks with. I won't go into a deep tangent here, but we developed a program called Elevate for a big tech client, in which we put a bunch of their high-level speakers through 35 folks through kind of a boot camp, if you will, in which we really talked about their story. We talked about their message, and we made sure it kind of tied up to the larger message, as well as was going to resonate with folks in the room.
If only we could always do that.
It's hard. It's a lot of work. It's not easy.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's part of the challenge. This is a lot of work, and you're battling with the time with speakers, right? Once you have selected them, can we get time to coach them and really help them through this process of making their sessions, their presentations more effective? It's not easy to do, right? Because it requires more time. But just to come back, I think, to the point of what can we do to support speakers as well, is the challenge is most of the speakers are subject matter experts. They're not speaking professionals. Right. There's a big difference. That's one thing, right? So they may be excellent in their technical content, but they don't know how to deliver it effectively. While it may be extremely important what they know, that delivery phase is lacking. And therefore, as a result of that, they could be the best, as I said, most technically gifted person on the planet. But in the end, if they cannot convey that in a way which is from a learning point of view, as to what does it mean and how is it influencing, or, what do people need to take away with what they know? If they don't know how to transmit that, that's a problem. And therefore, I think they need to be thinking far more from the point of view of being delegate-centric with their content as well. That's one. What we can do is, how is this content relevant for the delegates in front of you? Do you know who they are? Do you know what their challenges are? And do you know, therefore, how to make the connection and bridge with your content with what's important for them? Oftentimes, that thinking process doesn't even happen with a speaker. They only think about, what do I want to say? And they want to basically brain dump everything that they know.
Right.
And that's where there's a big, big lack in terms of impact when a person walks out the room.
Or even worse, they want to brain dump what they know and also what their company can sell to the audience.
Exactly. Right. It's a selling pitch, right? Exactly right.
It's a whole other level of badness.
Right.
Right. And then you look around the room and you just see whatever today's version of solitaire is. That guy's got Slack open, that girl's on
Well, and I think
people aren't absorbing it.
Oh, go ahead, Drew.
No, that was it.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that, the other, we have these events and we're investing so much money in them. So whether you're spending, your own $1,000 to attend a conference, whether the organization is spending $500,000, $1 million, $10 million to host an event, depending, obviously, things are done at all different kinds of scales. And yet we don't think that an investment of 2 to 4 hours of time to do some storytelling, coaching, speaker training for the people is worthwhile. When the reality is that it's the most detrimental thing when you don't have speakers who have resonated with your audience. And we've all been there. We've all been at events where they don't resonate. We've all hosted events where they don't resonate. So how do we start to change this thinking? Because to me, this thinking is at an organizational level,
Yeah.
as well as at an event level. What can we do? Totally putting you on the spot with this brand new question.
No, I think it's good. I think it's about impact. It's about understanding the cost of this, is what you said earlier, because everything, numbers speak volumes, right? So I'll give you some statistics around it. It's, if you think about from a learning or let's say a training point of view, the research done, if we talk about Robert Brinkerhoff's research, he's a professor or was a professor at Michigan State. He basically looked at the fact that 80% of what is learned is what they call scrap learning. 80% is not applied afterwards. Afterwards, 80%. So you can imagine putting that figure to how much it costs to actually create and deliver a training, but you can still do the same for an event from a delegate's point of view. Well, 80% is blown anyway, unless you do certain things. And one of the aspects, one of the ingredients to improve the effectiveness is the speaker itself, of course, in terms of how they, what we talked about already, right? How can they be more effective? But there are other elements, of course, and how do we reduce the rate of scrap learning, right? And that is all the thinking about pre-engagement. That's about the formats of learning, right? One of the things I would love to see, instead of having speakers or sages on stage, is to have guides on the side. Some of you have heard that phraseology before, right? A sage on stage versus a guide on the side. A guide on the side is like a facilitator. I believe speakers should be far more facilitators of learning than they should be as top-down speakers. I think that's a transition we have to make. And that, I think, as well, from the learning point of view, facilitating dialogue, interacting more, getting attendees to connect with one another more is far more powerful. And I think that's where you get a much greater return on, let's say, behavior change, right? Ultimately, right? And something that's going to be far more applicable when they leave the room.
Well, one thing that we have done is, when you're talking about tools, is that ahead of time, we send stuff out, right? So we know folks are speaking. We partner them with someone that can really coach them, not only on the content that they're gonna present, but on the story. And that needs to happen ahead of time. So we're making them answer some questions that they might not have. One thing that I have noticed in working with folks, you find out you have to make a talk, and the first thing you do is you open up the dreaded PowerPoint and you start typing away. And that's kind of the worst place you could start. You've got to take a step back and start thinking about, what do I want to say, to whom, and why? And I love the notion of, I'm a big Nancy Duarte fan, but her book kind of says, what keeps them up at night? What challenge do they have, and how are you the only one that can solve it? And if you aren't thinking about that stuff before PowerPoint, you're gonna have a really tough time making a cohesive, strong message. So those are some tools beforehand. And then I think we can increase the amount of tools on site. Just taking it back to the on-site resources. We've built this thing in a couple of events that you can name it a bunch of different ways. You could call it a speaker university, you call it a speaker's lounge, you call it a networking lounge, whatever you might want to do. But think of it as a VIP place that has a bunch of teleprompters, some monitors. It's a safe place to go and make mistakes. There are places where you can sign up to get some coaching. Your friends can stop by and check you out. Basically, if you have a PowerPoint problem, someone might be able to help you with it. Think about it as like a Genius Bar for all of our speakers for our event. You could come in and get some real-time expertise on improving. So those are some tools. We definitely have to talk to them early. We definitely have to help them on site. And we have seen this improve greatly with folks that want to improve and put the work in.
Yeah, and I think then you've got the pre and the during, as Drew has just talked about, right? Pre-engagement with videos, articles, whatever, podcasts, right? To prepare the mind, I think, for what you're going to actually engage with when you're on site. On site, of course, having the tools that Drew's been mentioning and many others. But then there's the post piece. And I think we've got to use technology better, right? In terms of, if I just use, and as I said, I'm not speaking about the event side now, I'm speaking far more specifically on the learning and development side within an organization. What we would do is use micro learning in today's world, right? Because bite-sized chunks, because what we know, and I think Tahira, that conference that we both attended in Bangkok, I mentioned this in the opening, about how much there is a loss of knowledge within the space of 48 hours, right? Based on Ebbinghouse's work, which is 80%, right? Based on the research done by Ebbinghaus, 80% of what we bring into our minds within 48 hours, 80% is lost. Right, so you retain about 20% at the most. which when you think about it, well, that's devastating, right? If you think about return on investment. So the one way to try and increase that level of retention of knowledge that you're gaining through a session or through an event is by having space learning, right? How can we now feed key messages, right? Using, let's say, smart technology, what can we do post-event, for example, right? Now, that's very tough to do because once the event is over on the day, it's over. So I think, what can we do? I think that's a question that we need to be asking is, what can we do afterwards to make sure we remind the key messages after an event is closed? Because that helps us to improve and boost retention, which then ultimately helps the application of what you've learned.
Well, I think in today's world, most events have a video capture sort of component, right? So it's more expensive to fly all the people in than it is to set up a couple of cameras. So I think the content is there. You know, it is someone early on helping pepper it out, helping plan it, and saying, hey, I know that you were in this session, which happened simultaneously to this session. There's no way you could have checked it out. So maybe this is something you'd like to check out. Or based on your history, we know that sessions you attended, how did you like them? You know, fill this out. There's a knowledge check, or check out this other talk. You know, the content is there. We kind of lose track of it. You know, the event is over, on to the next one.
That's right.
It's so true. I want to actually go back to the on-site experience a little bit. So I know, Drew, one of the things that you've been doing some work with is action-based learning. Can you tell us what that is all about?
Well, I mean, look, anyone in the learning professional, you know, knows that you learn through the senses, you learn by doing, you know, and any good facilitator is going to build in activities. I love this notion that Avo brought up, which is that we need to think of our speakers more as facilitators. I would love for someone to say, instead of let me tell you 10 things awesome about my product, look under your seat. We've put 10 iPads out and I'm going to walk you through it. We're going to just try some stuff and you're going to see how cool it is. You know, and I would love to do more of that. But when it comes down to this idea of action-based learning, this idea of on-site learning, I had mentioned that one of the places where I'm really fascinated is this intersection between creativity and learning. And so we've been looking for places where how can we create a cool environment that invites people to use the senses to learn something. We recently worked closely with a technology company who had a specific objective. They wanted to take their products and they needed to go to key locations around the country. And they had to teach folks about them, not only their salespeople, but customers, clients, you know, potential clients. And we pitched them a bunch of stuff and we ended up landing on this bus. It's a giant mobile training tool. It's a giant experience. But rather than just turning it into a classroom on wheels, it looks cool inside. It kind of looks like a WeWork space. It has monitors and people are, you know, you can hang out there and eat and drink and stuff. It has cool music. It has a vibe. And this is complex mobile technology. So it gave folks the ability to leave the session in which they were learning some of the nitty gritty and actually come onto the bus and hold it and touch it and experience it. So that's an example of a real life sort of immersive training environment in which I think the creative director worked very closely. We worked directly with the learning team to build this environment that got people psyched, you know, got them excited.
No, it's cool, Drew. And I think that's using neuro-linguistic programming. That's using, right, kinesthetic learning, for example, as a way of immersion and anchoring, right, and creating memories, right, in the senses. And I think that's a very powerful, tools to use from an adult learning point of view, I think, right, using that. It's great. Really
I think
good.
also the other, you know, tool that we're seeing more of, or should be seeing more of, is peer-to-peer learning. So are you guys seeing that being used effectively?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a huge trend in moving into the what we call the social spaces, the networking spaces, the places in between the general session and the breakouts, right? So we've worked really hard with our clients to no longer just make those, you know, lobby carpet. They're cool. they have beanbag chairs, they have music, they have screens. There's oftentimes a guy making coffee or something. And we've kind of thought, like, people do work now in coffee shops. How can we kind of recreate that vibe around a conference and give people these spaces where they can go and connect specifically? But we've done more than that. And we've offered what we call them micro theaters. We've offered spaces to let the company's SMEs come in and actually share stuff. Kind of think of it as a TED Talk model where there's little bite-sized learning where someone might share tips and tricks. Someone might, you know, have their technology out so folks can test it. And kind of diving into it a little bit. But we love that idea of helping build a container, you know, so that these subject matter experts can shine.
I like that a lot. I think it's, one of the things that we see at a lot more events is exactly those sort of coffee shop environments and bean bags and those kinds of things. And I think that sometimes it feels a little bit gimmicky, oh, look, somebody's doing bean bags again or whatever, when the reality is that it is exactly what you just said, is that it's actually based on understanding, neuro-linguistically how we learn, understanding kinesthetically how we learn, which are just really big words for saying that we've all arrived with a brain and our senses are alive. And for God's sakes, just please engage them, because we came to this conference to be engaged. And we have all of these opportunities, I think, to use those touch points to really get people connected to our organization, to each other, to the, place that we are. And we have all of these misses because we get so focused on some of the wrong things versus understanding that people come actually open to learning if we just help them a little bit. So I think you guys have covered so many of those like amazing tools. So, and I love the idea that you guys have talked about so well, which is that idea of before, during, and after, that a meeting is only one part of a learning journey or an organizational story. And we're now in this place where we're competing so much for talent globally everywhere. So, and you've already talked about some great examples, but how are you seeing people using great events to help build on that loyalty and that retention and that learning and that giving people that desire to continue to stay with the organization that presumably is hosting them?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that if we think about, especially the millennial generation and beyond, this Gen Z's coming, is, having the opportunity to grow as a person, but also, as an individual, but also in your career is a fundamental motivator. And that's coming out in all the research, right? It's becoming higher and higher up on the list. If we talk about top 10 motivators, careers and learning paths and development opportunities are definitely up there. And therefore you can actually then map that and say, well, hey, having the opportunity to go to an event, to a conference, which gives you the opportunity to meet others, to network, to learn from others, to share what you know as well, is a fantastic way to invest in your people and to show that also that you're caring for their future. So I think there's no doubt that you can map those two things together, Tahira. And there's many other ways of doing it, of course, but I think that is one of them for sure.
I really like that. What about you, Drew?
I love the idea of inspiring folks. We actually, going kind of full circle back to one of the things we talked about, I think before we even started recording, was this idea of making sure that you got the folks together in the room and you talked about what you want to accomplish. We're designing an event that will be going on in Miami later this year, but one of the things they wanted to accomplish was like, hey, we heard from our people that they wanted more personal development. We would like them to think that we listen to them and that we're going to give them these chances. And it comes back to this idea of time. It wasn't in the agenda. They didn't think they could fit it in, and they came up with a really cool solution. A lot of events are kind of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and people fly in Monday morning. And they had this idea which said, hey, we're going to offer some personal development, and if you want to be a part of it, you can fly in Sunday night, and the first half of Monday is for you. We're going to offer 6 classes. They're all 2 hours long. You pick whichever ones you want to go to, and this is an investment in you as a person. And we really, there are a couple of them that are a little more tactical and data driven, but we're talking about conflict resolution, storytelling basics, like some things that I think help them as a human being. And that kind of investment is going to make them really psyched about their job. It will absolutely help them in their job, but also just as a person in life.
Something else, Tahira, if you don't mind, Tahira, just to add on to this, actually, as I'm thinking about it, is about engagement, of employees, and how do we link that into a conference setting? How does it become a part of a strategy? And that's the key word. It's another thing a meeting planner can do. Anyone who's meeting with a client and say, you know what? One of the things about your event is that it can become part of your people engagement or talent engagement strategy. And this is how. It can help as a part of a series of events to continue their development. So if you are able to speak in those terms, you will actually get the attention of people within, for example, in HR, but also key leaders, and saying, wow, we never thought about this as being part of our talent engagement strategy, because that really fits in terms of professional development. And yeah, did you know that professional development now and in the next few years is certainly up there on the top, one of the top 10 drivers of motivation and engagement of employees. And it's going to become higher and higher up on that list. So this is a way I think we need to connect the dots once again from the meetings point of view, meeting planners, and ultimately how you talk to organizations.
And I think, and you guys have talked a little bit about this as well, this, as we get more into the reality that having a digital tool in our hand all the times is now just a normal state of being, the craving for more human-to-human interaction just continues to increase exponentially. Mm-hmm. And we have this amazing vehicle called events to do that. And we do need to be smarter about how do we integrate, when do you pull out an iPad to do some training so that they're not on their phones looking at Slack, because they're actually talking to a person beside them about what you want them to learn that they can take back and apply. Like, it's just, when we look at it and talk about it, it seems such an obvious circle of life of events for organizations, but we aren't really doing such a great job always of telling that story, I don't think. So, what's crazy is, as always, we started this a while ago, and it's like, I always say it's like doing a spin class. At the beginning you're like, oh, how will we last an hour? And then at the end you're like, what, where did that hour go? And we are getting close to the end of our hour. So I would like to just ask each of you, just for, if you were just giving one tip for event planners, what would it be? Just
Who do you want to go first?
Alphabetical.
One tip. Think more about how the event will help drive the outcomes or the results that the client requires. Think with the end in mind, and everything you design, you should be thinking about, well, how does that help us achieve that goal? And if it doesn't, then think again.
The tip that I wrote down here, we call it walking in someone else's sneakers. So I think that we as event designers need to continue to have more empathy and thinking about those users, those participants. And you got to think of it beyond that too. The CEOs, the CTOs, think about, put everyone's shoes on, and look at your event through the lens of that. What are you saying? To whom and why? So walk in someone else's sneakers.
I love that. Any cool new resources, websites, blogs you love, a book that must be shared that you'd like to share? You've already given us so many.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we didn't mention, but I think it's worth people looking into is, if you think about adult learning, you think about also, we never talk about personality types, right? Is that personality types has a huge influence with how we, as delegates, we all have a personality type, right? Some of us are thinkers, some of us are feelers, some of us want to actively experiment, some of us just want quiet time, and so on. Look at personality types. There's a lot of things like, think about Myers-Briggs, think about this, think about insights, right? Using colors. I think insights.com is a great place to go, for example, and link the personality type with types of learners. That's one thing. Drew?
I'm currently reading Twyla Tharp's book, who's a well-known choreographer. It's just called Creative Habit. And I think it's, a little bit oblique for someone that's directly in the events industry, but anyone that's challenged with a problem creatively, she has some really cool ways to get out of them. So I really enjoyed that.
And I have one more. It's actually the book I read a while ago. It's not, once again, 100% event related, but it is about culture related in the organization, and also talks about learning. And that is the book by Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. Hit Refresh is his book. A fascinating read, and especially how he's turned around an organization which was know-it-alls to learn-it-all.
Wow.
That's what he says. Everyone in Microsoft, when he became CEO 5 years ago, was a know-it-all. But he basically has transformed the organization, the mindset, to become learn-it-alls. And how he's done that is phenomenal. And if you look at Microsoft's stock, it's tripled in 5 years he's become CEO. And it's an amazing read and how he's done that.
That's actually pretty cool. Know it all to learn it all. I really like that.
I like that.
really, I think we need to do this again. Honestly, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface a little bit. It was amazing. You guys were wonderful guests. Thank you so much for sharing. And like I said, I know it's just the tip of the iceberg. So that was awesome. I need to tell you guys some things about EventIcons. So we're recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, or 2 o'clock in Vancouver, or 10 o'clock where Avo is. This show will be available next Tuesday on all of your favorite podcast apps. So wherever you generally listen, you can find us. We can watch live every week at event-icons.com. And we'll also put in there all the show notes, and they'll put in the resources that you guys have mentioned, which is awesome. And we want to know what you think. So let us know. And if you think there's another icon we need to know about, let us know. So thanks for joining us, everyone in our audience. And thank you, Reed, for your comments today. He was just talking about how sometimes when speakers aren't paid, they just don't want to spend that extra time on training, but they think that that's, again, something that we just need to, it's another one of those stumbling blocks. If we really want to deliver content, we need to keep working on. So it's great. And thank you so much. And we are right on time and out.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway.
And join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media.
Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.